Hi everyone, you're watching the Brush Gun series, and I'll be straight up and honest and say that this was never intended to be a series. So I did a video dealing with brush guns and 12 gauges, and that was supposed to be it. It wasn't supposed to be a series, but y'all spoke, and I have to basically comply. And because of that, because the 12 gauge video was supposed to be a standalone piece, there were things that just got cut for time that just didn't make the cut, and because of that, a lot of the theory was cut out of the video and it didn't articulate it very well. And so I thought I'd take an opportunity to go ahead and do that. So this is going to be the primer, it's going to be unlisted, it's going to be at the top of the series. That said, if you have a caliber that you guys want to see, test it. If you're watching this perhaps months after this video is published, then you can vote for that caliber on each of these subsequent videos, and they count as an individual vote. So just throwing that out there. So first and foremost, the thing that I wanted to talk about was a review of external ballistics. Remember that we are firing bullets, not rockets. And because of that, the bullet reaches its maximum velocity as it leaves the muzzle. And depending on how long the barrel is, you may actually, we did a whole nother series on that, actually, or not a series, a whole nother video on that too much barrel can actually be detrimental to velocity. But in the most guns that are made properly, that's not a problem. Anyway, the assumption is that the velocity is at its maximum point as the bullet leaves the muzzle. A rocket, by contrast, speeds up after it leaves its launcher or tube or whatever. Because we are firing bullets and not rockets, the only thing that really matters as far as testing is concerned is the relative distance between the target and where the bullet impacts our test medium. And the test mediums that we're going to be using are three things, and they basically make up, in some assortment, brush in the Midwest, which is where I live. Shoots, which are like these little tiny hollow stem with plant matter on top of them, and they form mostly in transition zones, especially ones that aren't well mowed throughout the year. Sorry, I need something to drink. It's allergy season, which actually wasn't even a problem for me until after I turned 30, and I was also watching my nephew this last few days, so I might have some crud going on. That aside, next up in the difficulty level above shoots would be something like a briar bush. And I think we're all familiar with that sort of thing, the things with the thorns on them. And they're a little bit more robust, but they haven't made it to full woody plant yet, and that is going to be our third level of difficulty for a projectile, would be some kind of stick of some kind, whether it's a branch that's hanging down, obscuring the flight path, or if it is some kind of woody shrub or something that comes up out of the earth by itself. Sticks, so to speak, branches. So, in order to design a test medium that was repeatable of some manner, shape, or form, I basically built an apparatus and set it at a distance that allowed us to hit a test medium, either the shoots, the briars, or the branches, but also be able to see the target. So we basically stack them up in a single layer, and what that allows us to do is sight over the test medium but shoot through it. Now what that allows us to do is to chase a single layer of impact. So that projectile gets fired through the medium, impacts theoretically one, but usually because of the diameter of the bullets, are probably going to hit more than one, but the idea is that it is a single layer that is going to, for all intents and purposes, present to the front profile of the bullet. And the idea is one impact on the way to the target. And then, depending on the difficulty that the projectile receives, y'all can do the extrapolation of the data of what it would be like to hit multiple, of those on their way through a thicket or something like that. The more difficult the medium, the more impact on a projectile we expect to see. And ultimately what I'm going for with this is emulation of a scenario from my youth. I was out deer hunting for the first time with my dad. I had a 20 gauge shotgun, and there was a deer out there at some distance, and somewhere in between me and the deer, my slug hit a branch, and the projectile never made it there. And so my concept for this is that the bullet is discharged from the barrel, the bullet impacts the test medium, and then continues on to a pre-sighted target that we've already shot a group on, and we know approximately the accuracy of the rifle with that ammunition or shotgun with that ammunition before we did the test, and then we can kind of map the dispersion of those rounds as we move through the test. If, however, we have a situation where we have substantial compromising of the projectile and the projectile doesn't make it to the target or completely misses our target, our standard cardboard target that we always use, then we're going to go ahead and move that in.
And then the third shot is somewhere in here.
Now remember, bullets fly in a three-dimensional arc, and it's actually not something that a lot of people think about, but we have a vertical arc, as in the bullet is fired from the gun and it goes up into the air and then gravity brings it back down. So that's one of them. The bullet itself is spinning about its axis, right? And then also, not only is it doing this, but the whole thing is shifting in space, like this. Now, that's a lot of axes of rotation to worry about. An impact anywhere in there is going to cause the cone of fire to grow. Halving the distance to something like 25 yards will allow us to see how bad it is, because as you move closer, that cone of fire will shrink and give us an idea of what the bullet is doing. What we're really looking for isn't how bad the previous one was, because we're probably never going to get replicatable data as far as where it hit, because there's going to be too many variables associated with how that bullet was presented to the medium and how dense the medium was, and was there a knot in that particular one. All of those things are going to be nearly impossible to track. But what you would see is, if we did 1,000 of these, for instance, you would see data that instead of seeing a cone of fire that was this big without any kind of interference, you might have a cone of fire that's this big, and they'll group somewhere in this space, for instance. Well, if it's this big at that distance, at 50 yards, then it'll be this big at 25 yards. And that's kind of the idea. What we're looking for at 25 yards after we've moved it in is the shape of the hole through the target. Almost certainly we're going to see some kind of degradation of that projectile. It's probably not going to make a nice round hole. And if for some reason we get a really nice round hole, we're going to shoot it again. We're probably going to shoot it again anyway. But the purpose being to show that the bullet is tumbling or some other way jacked up, and you would be able to see that as the bullet passes through in the form of a not nice round hole. And the idea being that if we do get a nice round hole, that is probably the bullet tumbling, say like this, and then it just so happens to enter the thin piece of cardboard like this and continues to tumble on through. A lot of times that'll show itself as some kind of tail on the hole, as in the bullet appears to have gone in like this, or it appears to be going in like this type thing, and then there's a differential between when the head of the bullet went through the cardboard and the tail of the bullet went through the cardboard. So you can think of it like kind of flying through like this type thing. Again, those are the theories associated with testing it. We can tell a lot from that without needing to go get a $100,000 high-speed camera to be able to actually see the stuff. If you guys wanted to see that, then hit up those crowdfunding pages and maybe we can make that happen someday. I would love to have a high-speed camera. I would get in so much trouble with that thing if I had it. I would break so many lenses. I'd have to have like 50 mirrors. But anyway, to recap, the important things are your position relative to the brush is irrelevant. It doesn't matter if that brush was 50 yards away or 500 yards away. All that matters is the distance between the target and the brush. That's the only measurement that is relevant as far as this discussion is concerned. As long as the blast from the firearm does not impact the target before the projectile gets there, which can be a problem depending on how the gun is set up, and that's one of the reasons that we set ourselves off at the distance that we did, was to ensure that the distance was great enough to not, and the medium that we used was shred a piece of paper. If it just put a hole in the piece of paper, then there's no chance that that medium was disturbed in any way by the projectile. The other thing that I don't really care about is the act of the projectile bending the brush out of the way and continuing on its path, because by and large that doesn't happen. Just as the name implies, tangential contact, as in a single point along the curve of the bullet touches that piece of brush and bends it out of the way. There has to be a very, very low percent contact with that brush to be able to do that. By and large, when bullets hit things at high velocity, they destroy them. And because of the materials that we use in the projectiles, generally speaking, the projectiles break up. Again, depending on how hard it hits the thing, it may make it break up more than others. It may cause its axes of rotation to go haywire. Things like that, depending on how big the impact is. But I don't really care about, hey, the blade of grass that's in front of it got nicked by the bullet and was pushed out of the way. Generally speaking, that is a level of impact that we can't really look at. And to be honest, I don't think that it's really relevant to the discussion, because that's not really what's going on. What we're really concerned about in thickets and in the woods and stuff like that is the bullet making a substantial contact with a piece of brush and then throwing the projectile off. So in order to do that, the most conservative apparatus that I could come up with was a single layer of medium suspended at a right angle with the direction of fire, perpendicular to the direction of fire, so that we get full contact on the bullet. And that's going to give us some kind of repeatable test that we can look at across a wide variety of calibers. Anyway, I think I've gone long enough on the explanation video, and I do apologize for the shoddy editing on this one. I just really kind of wanted to get it out before I published the other one, just because I felt as though it was incomplete, and there were some misconceptions in the comment sections I was seeing already, where people were like, hey, well, move the brush closer to the target. Well, you guys can do that in your brain. We did 50 and then 25 for the bad ones. If it's not doing anything at 50, or it's not doing a lot at 50, then it's not going to do a lot up close. Again, it doesn't matter your distance to the medium. It matters the medium to the target. Bullets, not rockets.